Good evening. Good evening. I will speak English, obviously, because our international guests do speak English. Good evening and very warm welcome to you all. My name is Christer Strömmark. I am the CEO of the publishing house Fri Tanke. Tonight, we are gathered to discuss two forces that are shaping our political age with extraordinary intensity. The longing for a lost sacred order and the rise of a political style built around grievance, spectacle, and power. At first glance, our two keynote speakers may seem to be addressing different worlds. Professor Mark Sedgwick will speak about traditionalism, a current of thought that rejects modernity and reaches for metaphysical truth, hierarchy, and spiritual order. Alain Roy will speak about Donald Trump, not simply as a politician, but as a phenomenon, a man who turned resentment, performance, and destruction into mass communication. But make no mistake, these two subjects belong together. Liberal democracy no longer feels inevitable. Across Europe and North America, old certainties are cracking. Institutions once thought permanent are now openly mocked. The language of compromise and pluralism is being drowned out by something far louder. Decline, betrayal, humiliation, purification, revenge. In an atmosphere like this, ideas that once seemed fringe become weapons. Myths of civilizational collapse, dreams of restoration, fantasies of strong men and purified communities. These ideas are no longer in the margins. They have moved to the center. And traditionalism gives metaphysical depth to anti-modern revolt. And Trump shows how that revolt becomes theater, identity, and executive power. And you can see it everywhere. You can see it in Trump's second term. Fights over executive power and democratic norms have turned existential. And in Europe, far-right and nationalist movements no longer present themselves as one option among many, so to speak. They cast themselves as the last defenders of civilization itself. And public debate is no longer merely economic or institutional. It is almost spiritual. What has been lost? Who betrayed us? What must be restored? And who has the authority to restore it? These questions are obviously dangerous when answered with paranoia, authoritarianism, or contempt for democratic life. But they are also real. Many people do feel that modern society has been disenchanted, fragmented, morally exhausted. Many feel threatened by globalization and migration. Many do feel abandoned by institutions, alienated from culture, suspicious of elites. So the challenge is to understand those feelings without surrendering to the movements that exploit them. And that's why I think tonight's conversations are so important. But before I present our first keynote speaker, there will be music. We are extremely proud to present a Swedish artist with a very special sound, as you will notice. He has published quite a few albums. He has reached international recognition. He's actually the first Swedish artist ever to be signed to Peter Gabriel's record company, Real World Records. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Emil Svanängen, Lonely Deer.
To keep it formal, I'll speak English to keep up with that. My mentor, when I was a young musician, they didn't have any set lists. They hadn't figured out what they were going to play when they played a concert. So I brought that into my adult life. So I follow that tradition today also. But I think I figure out the key and possibly a song. But it always happens when I touch the instrument. So we'll see where I start.
Thank you, Lonely Deer. Very special sound, as you could notice. You will hear more from him. Later, of course. Okay, now it's time for our first keynote speaker. He is a British historian, professor of Arabic and Islamic studies at Aarhus University in Denmark. His research focuses on the movement of religious and intellectual traditions across cultures, especially in the modern period. He's internationally known for his work on Sufism, Islamic modernism, traditionalism, which this book is about, Western esotericism, and terrorism and radicalization processes. And his new book, Traditionalism, the Radical Project for Restoring Sacred Order, is now published in Swedish as Den eviga sanningen, with an undertitle which is Filosofisk mystik och den radikala högern. That's the Swedish title of the book. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Professor Mark Sedgwick.
So, good evening. It's great to be here. And I'm going to say something about the philosophical roots of the radical right. First, I'm going to say something about the radical right and its relationship with ideology, then specifically about its relationship with philosophy, and then I'll come on to traditionalism, which is what this book is all about. And then I'm going to end with the uses of traditionalism that the radical right is making. The first thing that I want to say is that although I'm going to talk about philosophy and ideology, we cannot explain the radical right purely in philosophical or ideological terms. We have to start with sociology. We have to start with what is going on to cause the restructuring of European politics. And there is, as we all know, there are many explanations of this. I myself prefer to focus on the decline of the classic center-left dynamic that, for people of my generation, seemed to be set for eternity, and the decline of the center-right, which has followed on the decline of the center-left, which itself has followed on the decline of the industrial working class, because, of course, socialism was founded on the labor movement, was founded on the industrial working class, and as the industrial working class has emigrated to China, or at least as the jobs have emigrated to China, then the foundation of the old-fashioned center-left of socialism has vanished. And in the meantime, we have new issues coming up, as we've already heard this evening, issues of immigration, issues of multiculturalism, threats to identity, perceived threats to people's national identities, also perceived threat to gender identities, And then alongside this comes the rejection of elites, which of course isn't a new thing. Once upon a time, socialism was an insurgent movement. Nowadays, the elites who are being rejected are the liberal elites, and the liberal elites who are thought to be dominant might actually be dominant in the media, in government, in academia, and so forth. So this is something that we have to remember, that it is not all about ideology, but this restructuring of politics has created a space where there is a need for ideology, where philosophy has to come to the rescue of the right in some ways, and traditionalism among these. If we think about the history of the right and the philosophical underpinnings of the right, I'm going to focus on Europe. We're going to hear later about Trump and the United States, and although indeed Europe and the United States in terms of the right are interlaced, there's communication, it's a slightly different thing in the US. So I'm going to focus now on the European experience. And if we think of the European experience, there was once upon a time something called conservatism, and this of course still exists, but it's not really radical. Conservative theory is insufficiently radical to propel the radical right, and also in many ways, not exclusively, but in many ways, conservative theory is also somewhat a reaction against the left. So conservatism no longer serves the purpose. If we go back a little further, the classic basis of the right reaction was, since the 19th century, was the crown and the cross. And this no longer really works because crowns have become entirely symbolic, certainly in Europe, and the cross has rather lost the power that it once had. Importantly, though, the decline here is the decline of organized religion, not the decline of religiosity as a whole. So alternative forms of religiosity have been untouched or possibly even encouraged by the decline of conventional, institutionalized Christianity. But anyhow, that form, like conservatism, the crown and cross right philosophy is no longer answering the need that is felt in certain circles. The classic rightist ideology of the 20th century, which we call fascism or Nazism, is no longer fit for purpose either. I did actually recently read something that was referring to Giovanni Gentile, the fascist of Italian fascism, but this is extremely unusual, and I don't think I have seen anything serious recently citing Alfred Rosenberg, because this theory that there was a Nazi philosophy in a sense, but that has so thoroughly discredited itself that nobody is referring to this any longer, unless they want to be a bit countercultural and shocking or something like that. But it is not available for serious purposes. So what is available today for the radical right? There are a couple of, one could call them survivors of fascism. And I'm thinking here of Carl Schmitt, whose association with Nazism was sufficiently loose for his thought not to be discredited by what the Nazis did. And then there is also Julius Evola, the Italian, who once again had a very loose relationship with fascism in the fascist period, and who was therefore not compromised in the same way that Gentile was. So we have that as one possible school of thought. We have libertarianism, and this is quite important. Ayn Rand, for example, is not exactly a philosopher, but we could call her a philosophical novelist, and in certain circles, she is very popular. And then we have what was originally called the Nouvelle Droit, the New Right, and here the big names are Alain de Benoist, who was the organizer of an entire school of thought in France in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Guillaume Fay, who was initially working with de Benoist and then subsequently quarreled and separated and went his own way. And then if we ask what are the big names today, we might think of Russian, Alexander Dugin, and we might also think of the, is he American or Canadian? Jordan Peterson. Canadian, isn't he? Yeah. So, fine. Let us now try and focus inwards onto the traditionalism. Of the names I've just mentioned, Evola, Julius Evola, I'll say a little more about him. He is one of the central thinkers of traditionalism. De Benoist denies being significantly influenced by the traditionalist thinkers, but frankly, I don't think that's really true. He was very interested in traditionalism as a young man, and his later thought shows a very strong traditionalist influence, whether or not he accepts this. Alexander Dugin, he is a traditionalist plus. He's added various things to his earlier traditionalist positions, but he has never abandoned those positions. Jordan Peterson describes himself as a traditionalist, slightly confusingly, and he fits in a complicated fashion. He is, in the end, I think, more of a psychologist than a philosopher, but he too is part of this movement. So now, what is this traditionalism? What is this philosophy of traditionalism that I have tried to make accessible in this book? This is not the first introduction to traditionalism, but it is the first introduction to traditionalism written by a neutral observer rather than by a traditionalist. And traditionalism is a very elitist phenomenon. If you don't understand the traditionalist position is, if you do not understand this, you have condemned yourself, so you'd better stop reading straight away. This is not the approach that I'm taking here. I'm trying to talk to a regular audience, and the idea that if I become incomprehensible, this is your fault, not mine, is not one of my authorial principles here. So, what can we say about traditionalism? It was started by a Frenchman called René Guénon, who was born in 1886 and died in 1951 in Cairo. He was interested in religion, and this is the origin of the traditionalist philosophy, is not only Guénon himself, but his understanding of religion and the alternative religious milieu in which he started. He read Vedanta, he attempted to reconstruct what he called the primordial tradition. He attempted to practice that because he understood it as a spiritual tradition, and the reason he died in Cairo was that he had moved to Egypt, and he had also, as he put it, moved into Islam. He said that he did not convert because anybody who really understood the nature of esoteric religion was incapable of conversion. So that is how it all starts with Guénon, and then Guénon's thought is picked up by Evola, who was already interested in politics, who was already on the fascist side, who develops its political potentialities, and that is where we start. So, what does it consist of? As it says here, in Swedish, it's the eternal order, even though in English, for some reason, it's the sacred order. And this eternal order that the traditionalists conceive of is transcendent and esoteric. Esoteric because they make a clear distinction between the esoteric and the exoteric. And the exoteric is what we get when we go to church. The exoteric, in the case of Islam, is the Sharia. The idea is that every religion has an exoteric form which is for everybody and is also a basis of social order, and an esoteric form which is what is really interesting. And this esoteric form can be found in Vedanta, it can be found in Sufism, it can be found in Buddhism, and it's what some people have described as perennialism. But, this is extremely important, the traditionalists not only welcome a perennialist understanding of religions, but they pair this with a critique of modernity. And on the one hand, we have tradition, which is truth, and on the other hand, we have modernity, which is illusion. So this combination of the critique of modernity and the rediscovery, the attempt to rediscover primordial truth is central to it. The criticism of modernity includes the criticism of a list of modern illusions. First amongst these is progress. It is an illusion. Democracy is also an illusion. Equality is an illusion. Natural science is an illusion. It's not actually untrue, all this stuff about volts and so forth. It's just of no real importance, in contrast to sacred science, which has been lost. So where does the mysticism come in? As I said, Guénon's first interest was in the religious, in the spiritual, and his path was Sufism, which is a spiritual path, aiming at what we used to call in Europe mystical union. Mysticism can mean many things, but mystical union with the divine is the objective of the exercise. Evola did not become a Sufi. Evola, as a good Roman of the fascist period, was primarily interested in the Roman imperial tradition in Roman paganism. But he was also interested in different ways to self-realization, including what he called the way of the warrior. So, that is an extremely short introduction. If you want a fuller introduction, then you have a book. What has been used, what uses have been made of this? Well, I have three examples to give you. One of them is Alexander Dugin, who is now extremely prominent and is often understood as a Russian nationalist. He is not a Russian nationalist. He does not believe in nations. He does, however, identify the United States with modernity and the loss of all that is valuable in humanity, and he then identifies a civilizational bloc, a traditional civilizational bloc, led by Russia as the alternative and solution to that. Another name is Martin Sellner, who not everybody has heard of, but I think everybody has heard of the identitarian movement, and probably everybody by now has heard of the idea of remigration. Well, those two ideas go back to this Austrian Sellner. Sellner is a very effective activist. He does not talk about really difficult, complicated philosophical things. He decides, as a good practical politician should, he decides what are his points, and he makes those points. But he is himself very influenced by the traditionalists and is an admirer of Evola. And this is a good illustration of one way in which a philosophy like traditionalism can have an impact on real-life politics. So Evola writes, Sellner reads, Sellner thinks, Sellner comes up with some clever ideas, the AFD picks up his clever ideas, in the Dansk Folkeparti picks up his clever ideas. I'm not sure how they're doing, how remigration is doing in Sweden, but something that starts with a very philosophical position ends up having a very practical impact on politics. I have another example which is quite topical at present. You may have heard about the row about the Biennale and the reopening of the Russian pavilion. Well, this is actually a clash of traditionalisms. Meloni is interested in transforming Italian culture. She is interested in what some people call metapolitics. And therefore, she installed a couple of rightist intellectuals into two crucial posts. One of them, of a man called Alessandro Giuli, was appointed Minister of Culture, and then Pietrangelo Buttafuoco was appointed to run the Biennale. Both of these men are traditionalists. The guy who's running Buttafuoco, who's running the Biennale, is a good novelist, if you like that sort of novel. He's also a Muslim because he follows the Guénonian perspective that leads to Sufism and Islam, in his case more Islam, Shia Islam, as a means to mystical personal realization, but he's also a political actor. So why is it that Buttafuoco has insisted on allowing Russia to open their pavilion, resulting in a loss of a €2 million grant from the European Union, and also resulting in Giuli boycotting the opening ceremony of this? Does it have anything to do with traditionalism? It has nothing to do with traditionalism. It has an awful lot to do with practical politics. So that illustrates another dynamic. My first example with Sellner is how you can start off with an idea and end up with a political reality. The second example is how you can start off with an idea and events completely hijack that idea and you end up with something quite different. Life is complicated. Last thing then that I want to say is to return to the title of this evening, which is The Threat Against Democracy. Democracy is threatened in two ways. The right, when it takes power, is not terribly keen on the democratic process. We've seen what happened in Poland. We've seen what happened in Hungary. We're waiting to see how the Hungarian situation now develops, but the story is not ended. This is not central, however. This is incidental. Neither the Polish right nor the Hungarian right set off to destroy democracy. They worked within democracy, even if they deformed it as they did so. Traditionalism, on the other hand, is a principled rejection of democracy. Democracy, it holds, is an illusion, and it is a negative illusion, and we need to move away from silly ideas like democracy and equality and so forth. So, that's the book.
Thank you, Mark. Please sit down over there in the chair, and we're going to discuss this now. There is so much questions I have already, and yeah. So let me introduce my my panel. The Swedish historian of religion, author, and professor of the study of religions at Södertörn. Welcome, David Thurfjell. Boom. Swedish political scientist, author, associate professor and senior lecturer in political science in Uppsala, and a columnist in Dagens Nyheter. Please welcome Gina Gustavsson. In the sofa. Oh dear, there's so much to be said about this. But yes. Let me ask Gina and David first. What are your immediate reflections, Gina, on what you just heard?
I have two immediate reflections. One, upon reading the book, that I really recommend it. I think writing about these quite sophisticated and somewhat confusing theories for a broader audience is quite a feat. And this book really manages to explain these ideas for people who may not themselves be philosophers. And second of all, I'm very pleased that we're having this discussion, because I have felt for a while now that there is a tendency in the Swedish public debate, I'm sure that's the case in many other places as well, but the Swedish one is the one we're in, to focus very much on the sides of the threats to liberal democracy right now that are perhaps more in the past than the present. I think people picture something like the MAGA hat, kepsen, the red one, and they think, the threats to liberal democracy are they're populist, they're not sophisticated intellectually, they're nationalist, and they're anti-ideological, anti-intellectual. And that must be why people like Trump and Vance are attacking the university, for example, saying the universities are the enemy, the professors are the enemy, people like us here. But in fact, many of these ideas that these movements are built on are not very populistic in the sense that they are rather, to the contrary, very elitist. They have this idea of a Platonic, as in Plato, a Platonic guardian elite who should come in and in fact rule us all. And they're not even necessarily nationalistic. Like you said here on stage, Dugin is not really a nationalist, and you could say the same about quite a few of these figures, not only in traditionalism, but say someone like the post-liberal political philosopher Patrick Deneen, who is very influential on the new right in the US, being critical of the nation state. And the same goes for the tech bros in Silicon Valley. So that's another angle that is quite important and that we miss when we focus on the populist nationalist threat to liberal democracy. So I think traditionalism comes in here as an example of the other elitist, not necessarily nationalistic threat.
David, what do you think?
Well, I have a background in Islamic studies as well, Iranian studies, and I have followed this traditionalist movement. It's been in the fringe of my interest for many since I started this. So it was a great pleasure to read this book and to hear this presentation. But there's one thing that sort of makes me a bit frustrated, and that is the question whether traditionalism is a distinct movement, because many of the things that you sort of use to define, many of the definitions that you give for traditionalism, they also in some sense goes for religion at large. I mean, this idea of the inner meaning and the outer meaning, the elitist idea, the idea of a critique of modernity, a sense that the world is being flattened out by secularization and such things, they are quite widespread, broad ideas within religion. So there's sort of the shades of gray between Evola and religion at large. And this, and perhaps to culture at large even. So this makes me wary of this risk of sort of the guilt by association risk, because religion as a cultural phenomenon is extremely diverse and ambiguous. And just consider the fact that Ku Klux Klan and Desmond Tutu are representatives of the same religion. Or no, you can say Protestant, the contemporary expressions of Protestant Christianity. And this is how religion works. This is sort of the most significant thing in religious traditions, that they are these vast baskets of different ideas that people pick and choose from. So is it really possible to identify this thread of thought and sort of identify that he got this idea from there and there and there and then sort of create this sort of semi-fascist tradition? Or is there a risk of using guilt by association in this?
Mark?
Well, I mean, yeah, as you say, Desmond Tutu is an expression of a tradition, of a religion, of a religious denomination. But what matters, I think, especially in these areas, is the expression of a particular tradition rather than tradition as a whole. I mean, we can't talk about Christianity as an actor because it's too big, it's too varied. We can't really talk about Islam as an actor because, once again, it's too big and it's too varied. But within Islam and within Christianity, we have particular movements that have particular positions and have particular consequences. Traditionalism covers a number of traditions. I mean, as you say, Iran there was a whole story there which continues today, and that's a very interesting story. But it covers Islam. It's based in alternative spirituality. There are some Christian forms of it. Dugin is a Russian Orthodox, for example. So it's the expression that matters, and I think I agree. I mean, it would be wrong to distribute guilt by association. I don't think we can blame Christianity or Islam.
I also would like to clarify some definitions here, because you know, for a Swedish person, talking about being a traditional person, you like, you know, celebrating Christmas, it's a tradition. That's not at all what you're talking about. Traditionalism is obviously something else.
Yeah, traditionalism.
And let me just ask, would you say that traditionalism is the same thing as Philosophia Perennalis?
Exactly.
Okay,
yeah,
they are exactly the same.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
No, that's almost exactly right. Because the what you call Traditio Perennalis is this we know it comes out of the Renaissance and so forth, and that is the central idea there of the unity of religions at a certain esoteric level is the fundamental idea of traditionalism. And traditional means primordial tradition, not Christmas. The difference between traditionalism as developed by Guénon and friends and perennialism as developed by Marsilio Ficino and Stoico, and also Aldous Huxley, is that for all these perennialists, the central idea, which is widely shared, I think. I mean, a number of people who today would read a bit of a Buddhist classic or some Sufi poetry and find meaning in that. That is paired by the traditionalists with this very fundamental critique of modernity.
But it also differs quite much from, you know, the World Parliament of Religions, for example, or the Baha'i movement, which says all religions are same and we should live in happiness.
There is a strong connection to the Theosophical movement.
Indeed.
Okay.
And if you visit the Theosophical movement, their center in South India that I visited recently, they have in their they have a park there in Chennai, and they will have built their own versions of a mosque and a synagogue and a church and all the different types of temples. So this idea of all traditional religions sharing some kind of common truth is really there from the Theosophical movement.
But it might even be true, by the way.
Well, that's a metaphysical question. Yeah.
That's a metaphysical. But there is also this idea with historical cycles, like you had the age of truth, the golden age, where we lived in harmony, and then came the age of three, and now we live in the worst of ages, where it's all collapsed. Is that a Hindu narrative?
It's a Hindu tradition.
Even
but that's very central for this.
Traditionalism, indeed. I mean, if you
explain what that is to the audience.
I mean, in the West, we're very familiar with the idea of the Golden Age and the Silver Age and the Bronze. What's it? Bronze Age.
It sounds very New
Age.
Like
that, yeah, something like that. And in the Hindu version, we also conveniently have 4 ages, and the last age is the Kali Yuga, and that, according to the traditionalists, is where we are now. And
it's the worst.
It's the worst, and it's getting worse. It's getting worse.
Okay.
It's got worse since we started. And if you ever see the phrase Kali Yuga outside a primarily Hindu context, you really need to check that one out.
To watch out.
Can I raise?
To watch out.
Can I focus our attention on this? There's a nice word, conspirituality. I mean, the combination of conspiracy theory and spirituality. This is a thing, of course, in all these movements, that there's some kind of idea conspiracy going on. There's this some kind of elite that is running and doing secret things and such things in society. But there's also one of the features in conspiracy theory, which I think is a very unintellectual approach, is the identifying of a clearly identifiable sort of them. They are the ones who are driving history, whether they are the Jews or Masonry or something like this. And I think when it comes to these things, the problems that the traditionalists are pointing to, or the feeling that drives their movement, they're actually things that many of us, I think, share. So let's say this is in the 30s. So going on is sort of between the First and Second World War. I mean, it is somehow not completely crazy to be a bit critical of modernity in that time in history. I mean, the Second World War was the outcome of modernity, of these ideologies and nationalism and communism and fascism. So I think many people, perhaps everyone in those days, would be wary of what's happening with society. Have we lost something? Is something lost? We need to look for something that is true and beautiful. And this is the impetus. This is a basic impulse of which traditionalism is an expression, and which also many other ideological movements are expressions for.
Well,
so,
could we call it an ethos, maybe, of traditionalism? That the sort of the sentiment that drives it and that makes these weird ideas surprisingly popular, after all, today, or at least tied to very successful and rising political movements, is the sentiment that things have gone and keep going horribly wrong, and yet the people who are deciding over us and who should be in control, they seem to be thinking we're marching towards ever more progress. And that sort of gap, it's more of an emotional gap than a philosophical, really, but it's something that I can definitely understand that you might feel if you also take into account climate change, etc. You might feel it for different reasons, but this feeling that we are we're walking in the completely wrong direction, and the people who are leading the march, they think we're walking towards paradise, but in fact we're walking away towards from
so the sentiment that it's not like this. We are the happy moderns, and we are happy with everything, and then we have some crazy people who are traditionalists, and they are just fascist and Dugin. This is not the case. It's a complex shade of grey situation.
No, I mean the very few people are entirely happy with modernity. Karl Marx was not happy with modernity. He looked towards a very different future. What happens with traditionalism is that there is a particular explanation of the problem with modernity. And whilst I was beginning to research this years ago, and I talked to a number of traditionalists, and one of the things I asked them all was so how did you get into this? And I heard time and time again, I was dissatisfied with modernity, I was alienated, somebody gave me a book by Guénon, I stayed up reading it until 5:30 in the morning, and suddenly it all made sense. So the thing about traditionalism is that it provides an explanation. Now, frankly, Marx provided an explanation as well. Yeah. And Dugin, who is the most prominent representative of this school nowadays, he said that he thought that Guénon was the unrealized Marx. He thought that Marx's pair of capital and labor allowed you to build all sorts of things. And that Guénon's pair of tradition and modernity also allowed you to...
And hasn't the traditionalists traditionally been supporting environmental issues? Because they said nature is sacred, so they're environmentalists. Yeah. But how do they differ from modern green political movements then?
Well, I mean, there's the green political movement as a whole, and then there are Greens or environmentalists who base their thought in religion, and then there is a traditionalist, Said Hussein Nasser, who is the chief guy in the Iranian school here, who bases his analysis of the environmental crisis in tradition, understanding it as one of the awful things that's happening in modernity. And why is it happening? Because of the loss of the primordial tradition, which has brought a loss of relationship.
So what are their solutions? What are their idea of solution now?
Well,
if you would ask Guénon, if you sort of had a seance with him,
yes.
what would he say?
Well, this is where there's disagreement. There's agreement. There's fairly strong agreement on the diagnosis, but what do we do about it? Well, Guénon himself went to Cairo and became a Sufi and lived quietly in a little house dressed up in the most traditional clothing he could get his hands on.
Yeah. But is it one aspect that the whole idea that we have to solve the problem, so that it's up to us to make the blueprint for a good society and then somehow create it in practically, this is in itself a modern idea.
This is exactly what they say. Yes. So Dugin's solution is totally different. We are waiting for the apocalypse, and the current war is bringing us an awful lot closer to it, and that is a good thing.
Yes.
Should we not even accelerate towards the apocalypse, which is a term that overlaps with what a lot of the tech futurists are talking about?
Accelerationism.
Yes. So, and I think Evola is the one who talks about this already. But I was wondering, how does that? So, if Guénon is Marx, then is Evola, is he Lenin?
I think so.
And how much of a revolution does he want? He clearly wants an avant-garde to take over,
Yes.
maybe by revolutionary violent means.
Yes.
And he is the one who is most commonly read today by these more political alt-right figures who are reading these thoughts now. And I want to emphasize there's two Swedish connections here for the audience.
We've got
Good to know. Yeah.
Yeah.
The first is that this Guénon, the Marx of traditionalism, he was initiated into Sufism, right, by the Swedish painter Ivan Ageli.
Yeah.
Or Ageli, maybe you pronounce it,
Yeah.
who became a Sufi sheikh himself. But he was the one who influenced Guénon a lot,
Yes.
religiously at least.
Yes.
That's the first Swedish connection. And then there's the second, more contemporary Swedish connection, namely that many of these thinkers, including this more openly fascist Evola, Julius Evola, the Italian fascist, but also the Russian thinker, the contemporary Dugin, Alexander Dugin, have been translated into English for the first time, thus reaching a much broader global audience, by a publishing house that is owned by a Swedish alt-right figure called Daniel Friberg.
Yeah.
And this publishing house, Arctos Media, is a major player, the global player, in this alt-right intellectual sphere right now. So if it weren't for them, then maybe some of these thinkers would still remain very obscure. But as it is now, actually, Mark was just telling me in the break here that they seem to be financially doing quite well. People want to buy these books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure to what extent Sweden should be proud of Daniel Friedberg.
Exactly.
I
This
think
is like we killed Descartes, and then we made Foucault run off from the welfare state, and this is our third contribution to
But
philosophy.
I think Sweden should be proud of Ivan Ageli.
Yeah. But you also have Tage Lindbom, who used to be the head of the Social Democrats archives or whatever in the 50s, and then he turned anti-democratic. I don't know if he converted to Islam or to Catholicism.
I believe that he did.
Yeah, but he definitely turned against democracy.
And
His son has just written a biography about him. He's still
There's also
around.
another
He
one
died
called-
just 20 years ago or something,
Yeah.
Tage Lindbom.
There's another one called Kurt Almqvist. Not
yeah.
the Access one, another one.
No, the other, yeah.
But I just want to emphasize this collapse thing. That one of the sort of Hindu heritage is also this notion of the cyclical time. So there's this golden age, and it sort of
Silver Age, Bronze Age.
everything goes worse and worse and worse,
Iron.
and then there is a collapse.
Yeah.
And then it sort of it returns. So this actually informs this sort of passive stance. We have to wait for collapse.
But wouldn't it be correct to say that this whole movement split into two lines? The contemplative mystic tradition that Guénon followed, and then the political activist, which was Evola.
Yeah.
And today that is Alexander Dugin, that is Steve Bannon, who says we have to tear down the institutions and the structures to build something again.
Yeah.
And he is talking to Trump, who probably doesn't understand a shit about traditionalism, but he listens to
I don't think Trump understands that.
No, I don't think so either. But
I mean, indeed, it has split. I mean, the political side is based in the religion, the religious aspect of it. It's not purely political, and that's what gives it its special force. And the religious side has inescapable political implications, but people on that side generally don't follow those up in any way.
So according to these people, we live in the Iron Age now, and structures and hierarchies are being dissolved, and that's why they don't like femininity, or they don't like equality between the sexes, right?
They don't like the idea of equality between the sexes, because in their understanding, equality between the sexes is an impossibility. As far as the more social side is concerned, they have once again, there's the Hindu and the European that map onto each other quite neatly. We have the Hindu idea of castes, and we have the pre-revolutionary French idea of the estates. And in their understanding, what has happened is the inversion of estates, that the knightly class took power from the priestly class, and then the merchants took power, the bourgeoisie took power from the aristocracy, and then finally, God help us, the untouchables took power, and that's democracy.
I have come across this word, the Great Blackout. So instead of enlightenment, that you like, Christer, very much, there is the great. Another name for the same movement is the Great Blackout. So the sort of the complete loss of everything that was worth maintaining. Yeah, but I also want to say that in modernity or modernism has always had its flip side. You know, there's always been the modern age and the science and all the things associated to modernity. But then there's always been this romantic flip side. And even if you say 19th century, for instance, which we think of the age of industrialization and urbanization and modernity and all the big scientific revolutions. But at the same time, it's the age of spiritism and Orientalism and the romantic movement. So there's always this ambiguity in our culture historically. And I think this is an expression of that other side.
There's something paradoxical about the traditionalists being against modernity, but also being very much against the postmodern movement. And we see this in Sweden with thinkers like Lena Andersson, who follow Jordan Peterson and Alexander Dugin both talk about postmodernism as the main enemy, which is paradoxical because postmodernism, being post, is against modernity and sees itself as
after
such.
modernity,
after
maybe,
modernity, but also sees itself as very much questioning all this rationalism and
but there is a connection. Wouldn't you agree that there's a connection between postmodernity and romanticism?
Absolutely.
So the romanticism is sort of the inward-looking, what do I feel, as opposed to sort of the objectivist modernity.
Absolutely,
and there is the connection. So
But isn't it weird then that the traditionalists,
it's even weirder than
exactly, who are inspired by romantic ideas and also misanthropy, I think, this idea that the apocalypse is coming and maybe we even deserve it. We humans are pretty rubbish when you think about it. It's extra paradoxical, isn't it?
Yeah.
For a movement.
I think, if I can name drop here, I once wrote that traditionalism was essentially postmodern. And to my slight surprise, I got an email from Alexander Dugin saying, "Oh, you're quite right. I agree with you. Thank you."
Oh, really? But he's also said that postmodernism is the enemy, right?
Yes. Yeah. But he's referring to a particular variety of postmodernism.
Yes.
But there's a sort of an interesting twist there because there's something called radical orthodoxy. You know, as a theological Christian Anglican sort of conservative movement, and they sort of it's sort of the link between an extremely relativist postmodern position and a deeply conservative Christian confessional position. Because if you have this idea that everything is true in its different language games and so on, well then why can't medieval Christianity be my system? So you can choose the language game. Is that what you call it? Språkspel. You can choose the language game, the sort of in Wittgensteinian language game that fits your own whatever you like, your own identity, and that nothing can be true outside of its own sort of sphere. So then you can pick the deep conservative confessional stance.
Is one way out of this tension, and I'm more perhaps not the person to answer this question, but the question is one way to solve this tension for traditionalists that there are people, sort of the initiated, the elite, who are able to pick and choose and who are able to live with postmodern liquidity and, I construct things through language and I can understand that the things aren't necessarily set by someone else. And then there's the ordinary people who cannot and who should not have such a liquid understanding of, let's say, gender or what the family is, what the nation is. Is there something like that?
Well, I mean, the peasant should till the soil, the merchant should buy and sell, the knight should strike and die, and the priest which might include Guénon and people like that, they should work it all out and order society.
And is that the sacred order, the hierarchy?
That is the sacred order.
Between
indeed.
people. And when you try to get equality between the sexes and in society, that is breaking the sacred order.
But the sacred order is sacred because it is sacredly ordered, but it's sacred also because it reaches back to the sacred, to the transcendent. The priest is in contact, or is meant to be in contact.
But I must ask you, I mean, we're going to talk much more after the break about how this affects modern politics, of course, but I must just understand this. What is the metaphysical status of this order? From where does this order emerge? From God?
From God, from the first age, from the first day. And you know, this fits with the Hindu narrative, but also if we go back to the Golden Age, you know, who established the Golden Age? The gods or God or whatever.
Gods? It could be gods also.
Well, it could be gods, yeah.
Okay.
Now, gods or God, this is quite an esoteric discussion which Guénon would love to engage in.
I
It's
think
Platonic.
one. Oh, sorry.
It's Plato's idévärld, isn't
Yeah.
it?
The world of ideas, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think one interesting example is the case of homophobia and sort of anti-gay sentiments. I once had an opportunity. I was in Central Asia, and I was staying at this conference, and I met this young traditionalist Muslim Sufi guy, and we got along quite well. So I could have really nice conversations with him, and we could speak openly. And it's difficult to speak about these value sort of differences. But I asked him about this homophobia thing, and he said that the worst thing that he could think of would be, I mean, homosexuality is like, this is the worst thing that can happen to a society. He was then both sort of Russian and conservative Muslim, so he was sort of homophobic from two sides. And I sort of asked him, well, what is so dangerous about it? You don't have to be homosexual. I mean, can't others be whatever they want? And I think his answer there sort of expressed this idea of the mixing of positions as the most dangerous thing. So you have this idea that there's the order, the very structure of society.
It's breaking the sacred order.
Yeah, it's the structure is there. It's the man and the woman and the family and the classes and to like this.
Yeah.
And if you start to mix with those things, you destroy the very fabric of society. So it's much worse than a catastrophe or a volcanic eruption or a war or something like this. Because
Evola would agree and would disagree. He would agree because indeed it is, as you're saying, it's the sacred order. He would disagree because he was himself very experimental in matters of sexuality.
Mm-hmm. So how did he work that out?
Is that again something that is only for the initiated? And ordinary people
yes,
cannot
I mean,
handle.
In his early career, he was a practitioner of sexual magic, which is
Like
really only for the
like
initiated.
Aleister Crowley and the Golden Dawn.
It's only for the initiated, and I mean, we have to say, in terms of homophobia, I once was listening to somebody who explained at great length that Evel had only been his teacher, and I thought he protests a lot, this man, and I learnt afterwards that the reason that he had to keep emphasizing that Evola was only his teacher was that this wasn't actually true.
But there are many but there are many. I mean, many of the persons that you bring up in your book, they have this connection through initiation also. There is this, I mean, really strong sort of institutional connection through initiation.
Yeah.
But then actually Jordan Peterson, he stands out from this. Should he?
Yes.
I mean, we have this famous children's show on TV when one should be removed. You have 4 things and en ska bort. I mean, isn't it a little bit like that with Jordan Peterson? I mean, is he really a part of this group?
Yes and no. I mean, you're absolutely right, and I really hesitated about his relationship with this. He describes himself as a traditionalist, and one always has to listen to how people describe
In this
themselves.
sense, in this sense.
Well, he doesn't, if you look at his work, he doesn't cite Guénon and Evola. He cites Jung, he cites traditionalistic.
He cites Nietzsche quite a lot.
Nietzsche, but I mean also Jung and archetypes and things like that. So he's not central.
Yeah.
He's a sort of fellow traveller.
But he is very concerned with ontology, what we mean when
Indeed.
we talk about things being something that also the Swedish intellectual Lena Andersson talks about a lot.
Yeah.
So in that sense, and as I understand, the traditionalists, Dugin even sees this as a way of talking about methodology and ontology and the categories we use, and this has a lot to do with you can't just create a woman by socially constructing, reconstructing the term woman. That it has to do with political and very real debates in that regard, right?
Yeah.
But I have a question that might keep us here until midnight. Is there free will here, or not?
Oh dear.
Well,
I mean, if it's deterministic, and if you've got all these
we're
cyclical...
actually having a break now. So
Oh no, okay.
So maybe we should save that question at least after the break. But let me just, before we take this break, because the time is, I'd like to understand after the break why a person like Jordan B. Peterson obviously is so attractive to so many young people today, young men especially. There must be something here in all this that attracts people more now than for 20 years ago. And let's talk about that after the break, actually. And of course, the implications for Trump and everything, because we're going to hear more about Trump after the break. But now we have a 20 minutes break. Please go out and have a beer or something. There's probably still some sun out there, and buy books, because after the last act, you will all sign your books. So see you back in 20 minutes. Thank you. Our next keynote speaker is a Canadian writer, essayist, journalist from Montreal. He has written across several forms, including essays, fiction, literary criticism, and political commentary. His work often moves between culture, ideas, public debate, with a special interest in the myths, anxieties, and narratives that shape contemporary societies. He's also the editor of the cultural magazine La Conviction. He's here tonight to talk about the theme of his latest book, The Case of Trump. Please welcome Alain Roy.
Good evening. Thank you, Christer, for your introduction. Thank you also to everyone at Fritanke for the publication of my book Le Cas Trump in Swedish. It was first published in French. And for the organization of this public event in such a beautiful venue. The translation of my book in Swedish means a great deal to me because my mother, who passed away just before the pandemic, was born in Sweden and grew up near Stockholm. Sadly, I only speak a little Swedish, but I'm now taking lessons to solve that problem. Okay, I need encouragement. I would also like to thank my translator, Mats Forsgren, who's here tonight with us. Maybe one day I will be able to appreciate the work you have done and which people tell me is excellent. Thank you also to Professor Sedgwick for your enlightening presentation, and David and Gina, who have accepted to participate in the panel. And I want to thank you also, all members of the audience, who came here tonight for this talk about a man, rather unknown, whose name you may have heard before. I'm only half joking because behind the Trump that we all know lies a lesser-known character, a Trump that Trump himself doesn't want you to know about and that he may be trying to ignore himself. This is one of the reasons for all the smoke screens and scandals that he produces on a daily basis. It's a way to divert our attention from who he really is. Unfortunately, this diversion technique has proven to be quite effective. The media have grown accustomed to swallowing the Trumpian bait because it generates reactions and increases ratings. In that process, the public conversation often takes the shape of a stunned indignation. For many reasons, the future of democracy, amongst others, it is important that we do not succumb to this state because it is fundamentally passive. Stupefaction and moral outrage are not suitable tools to understand what the Trump show or the Trump circus is trying to hide from us. Why did you write this book on Trump? I have been asked this question quite a few times. It's hard to give a definite answer on why we write the books we write, but I can say this. I have experienced the state of stunned indignation, and it is not a happy one. It's a state from which I had to extricate myself. And so for 2 years, I embarked on a journey of reading and research. I read some 40 books on Donald Trump in order to understand the man, who he is, what motivates him, where he's coming from. These books have been written by members of his family, biographers, investigative journalists, people who have worked for him in his enterprises or in the White House, and also by psychiatrists, psychologists, and psychoanalysts. For the latter, Trump represents indeed an intriguing subject. Certain questions fueled my curiosity, like, why does this man lie constantly? According to the fact-checking team of the Washington Post, Trump produced a total number of 30,573 lies during his first term in the White House. That makes an average of 21 lies per day during 4 years. These do not include the personal lies. Another question that puzzled me, why did he have this strange idea of becoming President of the United States, a position that he's clearly not qualified to occupy, and maybe not even interested in occupying? Why didn't he simply play golf? In the course of my research, I also left my writer's desk to attend a Trump rally in the state of New Hampshire, not far from my country house in the eastern townships of Quebec. With a friend photographer, we both disguised as Trump supporters with our red MAGA caps. I wanted to see with my own eyes what goes on in these events, the manipulation techniques that Trump uses to establish the cult of his personality. The most surreal moment was when a short film projected on a giant screen described Trump as a savior sent by God to protect planet Earth. And the most troubling one was when Trump said to his followers that he was going to prevent World War III. Why was he talking about World War III? Why did this idea emerge inside his head? There is another question that I've been asked a few times. Given the voluminous nature of the Trumpian bibliography, why write yet another book on Donald Trump? Don't we have enough books about this guy? It's a fair question. My answer is twofold. First, in the course of my research, I was surprised by the number of astonishing revelations exposed in the books of Wayne Barrett, Tim O'Brien, John O'Donnell, Craig Unger, David K. Johnston, Trump's niece Mary, his lawyer Michael Cohen, just to name a few. We are talking here about facts of consequence, important facts that remain surprisingly unknown, or mostly unknown to the general public, including the media. As writers, it's a reality that we have to reckon with. It's not because you write something in a book that the world is going to know about it. Even if it relates to a man who is the President of the United States and should be the object of public scrutiny. Many of these consequential facts relate to Donald Trump's track record in the field of criminality, frauds, scams, embezzlements, insider trading, acts of corruption, sexual assault, dealings with the organized crime, not only the Italian mafia in New York, but the Russian mafia, to which Trump leased the Trump brand to cover up money laundering activities. This has all been very well documented and should have invalidated Trump's candidacy for the presidency. It's a mystery of our time. How could a man with such a shady past be elected president of the United States, a country that has portrayed itself as a champion of democracy, law, and order? Are there no vetting procedures in place in that powerful nation to ensure that people who have engaged in criminal activities do not occupy the highest seat of power? How is it that Donald Trump never had to face real consequences for all that he has done? Partly because he could rely on Roy Cohn, his crooked attorney, who was also the consigliere of the New York mafia bosses, Fat Tony Salerno, Big Paul Castellano, Carmine Galante, and John Gotti. What is most puzzling is that these criminal dealings of Donald Trump are not secret. They have been exposed by serious journalists and rendered public in books. Why didn't this information have a greater effect? Do facts no longer matter? Have we entered once and for all in the era of post-truth? The other mind-blowing reality that emerges from the Trump sources is the immense gap that exists between the image that he established of himself as a self-made billionaire and the objective fact that he was a failed businessman who racked up one bankruptcy after another and whose wealth came essentially from his father Fred, who was the real self-made man of the family. From his father, it is estimated that Donald received no less than $500 million. He could have obtained even more if his plan to modify his father's will and steal his siblings in the process had worked. Something very ironic happened in the life of Donald Trump at the turn of the century when he was in his 50s. After his casinos in Atlantic City all went bankrupt, Trump was completely ruined. His net worth, according to his own words, was minus $900 million, a financial disaster. It is at that time that he was, comically or absurdly, approached by the TV producer Mark Burnett to impersonate the character of a real estate tycoon for the reality show The Apprentice. Donald Trump, who had squandered all of his father's fortune with bad business decisions, was being hired to play the role of a successful businessman, a version of himself that he was not. But the American viewers didn't know that and bought the fiction that was presented to them week after week during many years, a fiction that would largely contribute to Trump's career in politics. The TV show gained good ratings and was profitable. And so, paradoxically or ironically, the fake self-made man was able to recover financially. The lie of his success became reality. With this nuance, however, it was not as a real estate tycoon that Trump was now making money. It was as a comedian. As Tim O'Brien has cleverly shown, Trump is first and foremost a showman, someone who plays parts. He plays the part of a businessman, the part of the President of the United States, and the part of Donald Trump himself, whoever that may be. The fabrication of illusions is an integral element of the Trump phenomenon. It goes back to his ancestor who decided to change the family name from Drumpf to Trump when he moved to America. Fred Trump, Donald's father, also spread the lie, and this one you will like, that they were of Swedish origin. They are in fact German. Donald repeats that lie in his book, The Art of the Deal, a book which he has not written, of course. It was written by his ghostwriter, Tony Schwartz. It's not clear if Donald at the time was consciously lying to his readers or if he was fooled himself by his father. One way or the other, it appears that it was a desirable thing for him to be Swedish. Luckily for the Swedes, this is not the case. By reviewing all these sources full of significant facts insufficiently known, it became clear to me that it would be useful to gather all this information into a single book, a book that would offer a summary of everything that is important to know about the character. This is, I think, the distinctive feature of Follett Trump compared to other Trump books that address one particular angle, aspect, or period of the character's life. By adopting a global perspective, my aim was to offer a comprehensive portrait that would shed light on the links uniting all of the main Trumpian themes: money, ego, lies, and power. All of these elements are indeed closely linked. Trump's narcissistic flaw fuels his need to lie, to have money, and to impose his power over others. But I should also point out that the purpose of the book is not solely biographical or psychological. It has concrete extensions on the political level and on our understanding of the current dynamics, which appear rather unstable, as we all know, and confusing with the wars in Iran and Ukraine, Trump's so-called Monroe Doctrine, aiming to annex different countries or territories, his desire to withdraw the United States from NATO, and the tariff wars that undermine traditional alliances. Understanding the motivations and mechanisms that drive our character is, I think, a necessary step to perform these two tasks that cannot be avoided in the present context. Because we're talking about one man, Donald Trump, but it's a man who has tremendous powers, and Donald Trump is not into ideas or ideologies. It's really about exerting his power on others. So these two tasks, A, decoding Trump speak, and B, evaluating Trump's dangerousness. What is Trump speak? Trump speak is the form of language that comes out of Donald Trump's social media account or his own mouth. Trump speak is not English, even though it uses English words. Unlike most languages whose words refer to shared meanings, it is a language where words have private meanings that must be interpreted. Like Orwellian newspeak, Trump speak reverses the meaning of words. It's a language where peace means war, where to negotiate a deal means subject the other to extortion. It is a language where threats can be jokes and jokes can be threats. A language whose purpose is not to convey meaning or clarity, but to confuse, manipulate, cover the truth, and transmit lies. However, once you get familiar with the art of decoding Trump speak, you can see that it also contains hidden meanings, the secret thoughts or desires that drive the Trumpian speech apparatus. I will illustrate this with 3 short examples. I will paraphrase Trump speak for the sake of brevity. Example 1. This is Trump speak. Canada should be the 51st state of America. They need us, but we don't need them. With my tariffs, I could destroy the economy of Canada. Let's translate this. Canada has many natural resources that are essential to the American economy. And it really annoys me that my friend Vladimir from Russia has a bigger country than me. If I could annex Canada, and also Greenland, then I would be the president of the biggest country in the world. Example 2, Trump speak. I created the Board of Peace, a wonderful organization that is more effective than the United Nations, and which has been joined by the most prestigious leaders of the world, and we are going to bring peace to the Palestinians. We will resolve a conflict that no one was able to resolve before. Translation. The aim of the Board of Peace, an unfortunately small organization with only a handful of leaders who have joined by paying me $1 billion each, is to take control of the Gaza Strip and turn it into a Hotel Riviera with the collaboration of my good friend Bibi that owes me a lot because I helped him bomb Iran. The Palestinians should be grateful that I will turn their devastated territory into a nice Riviera where they will have the golden opportunity to buy luxurious condominiums. Example 3. Trump speak. We will remember that Europe refused to help us open up the Strait of Hormuz. We defended you in World War II, even though there's a big ocean between us. We have helped you with Ukraine. NATO is just a paper tiger. Let's translate this in meaningful phrases. I couldn't take possession of Greenland on my first try. I have put Europe to the test with my request in Iran, but it has failed. Therefore, I have a justification to leave NATO, which I've never liked, nor my good friend Vladimir. Once I leave NATO, nothing can stop me from seizing Greenland and its rare earth minerals, which are essential to the financial security of the Trump family. So you get the idea. When Trump speaks, his words have to be translated in order to make sense. Trump speak is the verbal symptom of Trump's insatiable greed and need for self-aggrandizement. In the current geopolitical context, it is important to master the skill of decoding Trump speak. But in order to do that, you need to have a clear vision of Trump's goals, desires, and motivations. And you must never forget that in his frame of mind, language is not linked to any truth function. Language is simply and purely a tool to manipulate others in order to get what he wants. The second task that we cannot avoid is the evaluation of Trump's dangerousness. It's a question that I directly address in chapter 6 of the book, Is Trump Dangerous? My goal in that chapter was not so much to reach a definitive, though rather inevitable answer, but to gather all the facts and information related to the question of his dangerousness. And what we can objectively say is that these facts are numerous and take multiple forms. We have talked about Trump's criminal past. There is his litigant use of the justice system. Trump has been implicated in more than 4,000 court cases. That's an average of 2 new cases per week during 30 years. And also the weaponizing of that system against his perceived enemies. There is his bullying behavior since he was a small kid throwing rocks on other kids and hurting them. And that evolved in his way of doing business. He was convicted for sexual assault, and he constantly subjects his staff, his personnel, to public humiliation before firing them. There is also all his racist declarations and behavior. We could cite here his obsession with Barack Obama and his desire to erase everything that he has done in his term. There is another element, more psychological, which is narcissistic rage, his violent reaction when his ego feels threatened. And lastly, cognitive decline that we can observe by ourselves, related to a possible dementia, frontal lobe damage that causes a disinhibition of aggressive impulses. And when you add to the mix his narcissistic tendencies and grandiosity, this makes for a very explosive cocktail that some experts have identified as malignant narcissism. So, will this explosive cocktail explode or not? Nobody has a crystal ball, but I think that we should at least remain very vigilant and very aware of the dangers that this man can really cause. Trump feels powerful when he breaks the world order, but when also, paradoxically, he is breaking up his own country. With Trump, destruction and self-destruction go hand in hand. At the beginning of my speech, I mentioned the smoke screens and scandals that Trump is constantly producing to divert our attention from who he is. It is also to divert our attention from what he does. While everybody discusses the latest Trumpian scandal, the man is busy doing something else. And what is that something else? That one thing, it's not ideas. Trump is not into ideas. That other thing that primarily interests him is, of course, money. Money, which is for him the measure of a person's worth, the measure of his own worth. According to the Center for American Progress, Trump and his family have received more than $1.8 billion in cash and gifts since his re-election. 2/3 of this sum was obtained in the form of cryptocurrencies sold by the Trumps themselves. An investigation by the New Yorker suggests an even higher figure of $3.4 billion. Since his return to office, his Mar-a-Lago private club has brought him $50 million a year compared to $10 million previously. Pay for play. This is the expression used in the US to refer to bribes and other forms of influence peddling. The Trumps recently closed 5 hotel deals in the Gulf states. Qatar offered the president a private jet, which he promptly accepted, despite the constitutional clause prohibiting foreign payments to the government. Trump pocketed hundreds of millions by suing media outlets he was able to harass through regulations. In other words, he is using his presidential capacity to cause harm to enrich himself. Having launched a $230 million lawsuit for damages allegedly caused to him by FBI investigations, Trump now finds himself at the head of the government he is also attacking, plaintiff and defendant at the same time. By ordering his Justice Department lackeys to acknowledge the state's guilt, which the department should instead be contesting, Trump could divert this $200 million windfall from the public treasury. The same goes for his $10 billion lawsuit against the Internal Revenue Service. And for those other $10 billion that, according to his demand, the United States should bring to his Peace Council. That is to say, to its private offshore account managed by Trump himself, if he succeeds in this gigantic scam. So these are examples of the widespread corruption that characterizes the current presidency. The optimistic scenario would be to assume that Trump will not emerge unscathed from all this, that sooner or later he will have to face the justice he so dismissively flouts. If the Democrats regain control of the House in the November elections, and the latest polls give us an indication of that, new impeachment proceedings will certainly be initiated against him. Will he try to disrupt the electoral process to avoid this outcome? He is already announcing that the Republican Party should nationalize the elections in certain states. Would he go so far as to declare a state of emergency under some false pretext to suspend the elections? Will he launch other wars? Will his declining health exacerbate his desire for revenge, his narcissistic rage, his fantasies of grandiose downfall? Will the Trump show transform into a Shakespearean drama? We will know this soon, in a few months, when we enter the final act. Thank you.
Thank you, Alain. Thank you so much. Please sit down in the chair over there, and we'll please. Can you come up, Mark, Gina, David, and we will discuss this, of course. Alain, I was just thinking while I heard your discussion on Trump. I mean, couldn't all his weird behavior just be explained by that he might just have a brain damage on his frontal lobe, where judgment and empathy resides?
Well, I think that just exacerbates something that was already there since he was a kid. Trump has been somehow dysfunctional from a very early age. So it's
yeah,
not.
but maybe it's not his fault. He might have a brain damage. That's just an idea. I don't know.
Oh, I think he did pretty bad things before even his brain damage.
Okay. Okay. No. Okay. Seriously, very interesting, and it's a fascinating book, really, and a bit scary. But okay, let me just hear what you think about the presentation. Who wants to start?
I could start. I could say that, to me, when you write about his narcissism, what I thought was is the match between his narcissism and the kind of collective national narcissism of the MAGA movement. Is that something that may be important here? Because narcissism, as you know, is a lack of
Esteem,
self-esteem, thank you, where you crave the constant validation and praise, and you want to be high on rankings by others. And when you don't get that, then you get that narcissistic rage, because you actually don't feel secure in yourself. And there are people who use this term for a more collective phenomenon as well, and it's called collective narcissism, and some apply that to nations, saying that people like voters in the MAGA movement can score high on, there's actually a psychological construct called national collective narcissism, where you crave praise for the US from others, but you're not necessarily very attached or proud of your country. So I was just wondering, or thinking about that, overlap between two types of narcissism.
Yeah, I think that's what the MAGA movement, Make America Great Again, is all about. And another thing they share is the anti-elite posture or feelings. Because Trump, that's a kind of a paradox, because Trump was born in a very wealthy family. Donald was a millionaire at 8 years old. So, and I think that corrupted him in some way, because you can imagine the small Donald in the classroom, sitting there listening to the professor. He doesn't understand what the professor is saying because he has learning disabilities. That's what how he would be diagnosed today. But he's thinking, I'm richer than you. I'm a multimillionaire. I have $8 million. You'll never be as rich as me. I don't need to learn what you're telling me. I don't need to do my homework. So I think that also corrupted Donald in a way, and that fueled his anti-elite feelings, because it's a constant in his life. He has always despised the knowing class, university professors, journalists, and he's attacking them constantly. So he shares, even though he was very wealthy, he shares this anti-elite feelings with a lot of people from the lower classes.
Before we connect this to Mark's presentation, David, what's your reflections on the
Well, I think the
keynote speak?
yeah, it was fascinating and very depressing. And I think one question, of course, is why did people vote for this man? I mean, this is the big riddle. There are narcissists and psychopaths around and compulsive liars, but how could he become a president? And I think there is actually, now referring to my own field, history of religions, there is a religious underpinning to this. And there is this, I interviewed once a Pentecostal group belonging to the Pentecostal Christianity of a specific branch, and I asked them something about how they imagine Jesus to come back. How would you imagine the return of Jesus? And they all, to my surprise, gave me the same story. A story of an aeroplane flying and suddenly one of the pilots is gone or something like this. Very specific story.
The rapture.
Yeah, and this referred to the rapture idea, the idea that some people will be taken up to the heaven before the sort of end game starts. And that, in its turn, came from a specific film, namely the film called Left Behind. It's a book series and a motion picture.
Written by a pastor.
Written by a pastor, and it gives an image of this sort of worldview, because it's sort of it portrays the world. And one of the features in that sort of universe then is that a kind-hearted, peace-talking, friendly, intellectual leader has to be evil. So the Antichrist in that film comes in the shape of this UN secretary who speaks about peace and very Obama-like kind of characters.
His name is Nikolai Karpatya.
Nikolai Karpatya, you know, so it's like this Obama-like person, very articulated, intellectual, speaks about peace, friendly, civilizational dialogue, stuff like this. So this is sort of the trademark of something that you cannot trust, which I think sort of builds this suspicion of Barack Obama in these circles, sort of evangelical. And then Trump, although he's obviously not very pious a person, there's something trustworthy about him being the underdog. And this is the second thing that strikes me in your presentation, how the rhetoric of being an underdog is so efficient. Even the president of the United States, I mean, the most powerful man in the world, can present himself in a believable way as being an underdog. How is it possible?
Yeah, all of this is quite absurd. I forgot. Your first point was about...
yeah, but this whole religious underpinning of expecting...
That's what I wanted to see with my own eyes in the Trump rally. And in those rallies, what you really see is the blending of religion and politics. And there's all this decorum. They start with a prayer, then the allegiance to the flag, and then there are army members who are there. So there's God, there's the army, and there's the nation. And there was this unbelievable video who he is really presented like someone sent by God. And so Trumpism is also a kind of religious cult. And there's a very interesting book by an American journalist who's also a pastor called Chris Hedges. Maybe you know him. And he makes this point that the evangelical pastors in the United States, they run, like kind of religion businesses, and they have these masses that,
mega churches,
that are with all these followers that follow them blindly, and his point is that Trumpism is like the same thing. It takes the same techniques as these evangelical pastors, and many of his followers are in those churches. So when they see Trump, they're in the same same space.
Mark, what's your thoughts about Trump, and how do you relate it? I mean, Trump is obviously not a traditionalist because he's probably not read a book in his life, but some of the people around him. Or
He
what do
hasn't,
you-
he hasn't read even his own books.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is the thing. It's very difficult to imagine Trump as the priest elite or as the warrior elite or anything like that. But I mean, if we think of the people around him, you know, as
Steve Bannon.
take Steve Bannon, for example, who is anything but an idiot, who
No.
is inspired by Evola, amongst other people.
Yeah, an intellectual and education.
Who is an intellectual and who was played a large part in engineering the first election, and who actually survived as chief strategist for quite a long time. So, how do you know what is going on for people like that? And here I think we look partly at the critique of modernity and the critique of the liberal hegemony that upsets people so much. But also we have to look at some other strains of thought and the idea of the managerial class and the administrative state. And the idea that what we actually need to do is to destroy these structures. And Trump has actually been extremely good at destroying things. He's destroying the United States, he's destroying NATO, he's destroying, well, I mean, it's amazing. So there is an agenda which actually turns Trump, the destructive force,
Yeah, and that's in
into a
line
good
with
thing.
that's in line with the traditionalist agenda in the
It
political
is,
version.
it is,
Yeah.
it is.
So would you say that, I mean, the Heritage Foundation, for example, are they a part of that? Or Elon Musk's project of taking away money from institutions? And
I mean, this is, we have to look at the wider world
Yeah.
here. I mean, you know, Bannon is inspired by traditionalism, but he isn't first, and he's not in first position a traditionalist. He's not a philosopher.
Yeah.
He doesn't write long and difficult books or argue about the nature of symbolism or anything like this. But for the broader movement, Trump does serve a purpose.
I think there's an affinity here when it comes to the type of authority. So I think Mark writes about this in his book, that Max Weber distinguishes between different types of authority. And in modern times, we tend to think of authority as something bureaucratic and rational,
Yes.
and then bureaucracy and the state or even the HR department has the power. And Trump here stands for the charismatic type of authority that prophets usually have. And he is, of course, himself no intellectual prophet, but there is, I think, an affinity there. And I think that this hatred of bureaucracy, that for some, like Musk, possibly also has become intermixed with misogyny. There's lots of memes you might have seen about HR women. So this idea that the geniuses, who often happen to be men with high IQ, so not Trump, but people like the tech bros themselves in Silicon Valley, that they have been constantly held back by bureaucrats and by HR departments, and typically run by women who care about things like equality and rights in the workplace, etc. And so I think that war, sort of Doge, that whole project has to do with a hatred of bureaucracy, and some parts of that could be linked to this traditionalist. Because I think the traditionalists, I should have said that, I think the traditionalists are interested mainly in charismatic authority, if we go back to Weber's different types of authority. Is that correct? So that they seek that type of authority?
Yes. I mean, I think the charismatic authority is perceived as a divine authority. And Weber doesn't apparently believe in divine revelation, and he calls prophets people who hold charismatic authority. So certainly the bureaucratic authority we can all agree on, or they can all agree on, is characteristically modern, as characteristically liberal, is characteristically problematic, and that should go. That is to be deleted.
But isn't there also, I mean, the tech bros and those sort of intellectuals who feel a bit dispossessed, now it's revenge time for them, but it's also sort of the white working class. And there might be a connection, because in traditionalism, correct me if I'm wrong, there's also the ethnic component, at least with Alexander Dugin, that this ethnos, the deep ethnos, is it there? And what then would be the ethnic identity in an American case? And hasn't Steve Bannon spoken about sort of the white working class, the dispossessed working class who are unemployed, or they've been working hard for generations, and now they're losing all their assets, and they want, they want to be acknowledged.
Bannon certainly identifies with the white working class. You see, it certainly speaks for, or tries to speak for, the white working class. Guénon was not terribly keen on the working class because they were the lowest class. Dugin, this gets more complicated, and we have the idea of the ethnos here. For Dugin, theoretically at least, what really matters is your position, traditional or modern. When it comes to ethnicity, for the right, Jews are always a bit of a difficult area. And Dugin and his people claim to be very much in favor of traditional Jews and not modern Jews. And at one point he was running the Eurasian movement, still is actually running the Eurasian movement, although it's gone through a few modifications. And he wanted to gather together the traditional forces within Russia. So he gathered together himself, a mufti who had been appointed astonishingly under Brezhnev and was still around, a rabbi of some sort. So in theory, at least, it's not particularly about ethnicity. It's about faith, and faiths are it's not a particular faith is good or bad. It's a particular position within a faith that is good or bad. So that doesn't quite fit.
So what would you make of the QAnon connection? I mean, it's such an absurd combination of ideas that become a movement that even of such impact. How does it fit in?
Well, I mean, you said something earlier about
conspirituality.
Conspirituality. I mean, certainly for conspirology, we're all interested in trying to understand what's really good. This is what the discussion this evening is about. We're trying to understand what's really going on.
Yeah. Trumpism, if it worked, it's because he succeeded in federating lots of different things. And I agree with all the ideological forces that you point to behind Trump or around Trumpism and all these rational explanations. But I would also like to underline the truly chaotic nature of Trumpism. Yes, there is Bannon, but Trump never really listens to ideas. And Bannon, he fired him after 1 year because he thought he was taking too much place. Because Bannon postured as the intellectual of Trumpism, and Trump didn't accept that because he viewed it as a a way of taking power out of him. J.D. Vance, has turned Catholic, but now Trump is constantly fighting with the Pope. So, and for all you know, Trump could fire J.D. Vance next week. So we should never, I think it's something we have to always think about, is not to infuse too much rationality in explaining Trumpism, because there's a lot of it is just about his dysfunctional psychology and his power grab and his need for money. It's just something related to deep.
So, but if
cultures,
it's not ideology, that, I mean, referring to our little discussion in the break, what is it then? If it's not a set of ideas that combine in new ways, what drives this development?
Well, I think, I mean, Trump is a first-class destructive force.
Yeah.
So this I think we have to accept.
Because for him, destruction is an illustration of his power. Because the one who can destroy means he's more powerful than the others. So for him, and that fuels his narcissism, because being powerful. So, you know, everything with Trump always goes back to his psychology. Normally, you wouldn't use psychology to analyze political leaders, but with him, it's like an exception. You don't have a choice to do that, because we are not into really ideologies or political programs, unless you consider that blocking all the frontiers and having immigrants out of the country or lowering taxes. If these are ideas, maybe Trump has these two ideas, is to remove immigrants and lower the taxes. But it doesn't go further than this, really.
But I agree that is certainly true for Trump, and I think your book makes an excellent job at showing that for Trump, the individual. But I'm a bit worried that we focus so much on Trump, the individual, that we miss all these other people who are soon entering the stage. And you're saying it's the last act soon, but it's the last act for Trump. Very soon, we won't be talking about Trump anymore. And we don't know who we will be talking about. Will it be Tucker Carlson? Will it be J.D. Vance? But in any case, it will be people with more ideas, I think, around them. I think, for me, that's how the ideas come in, not for Trump himself.
But the Democrats could take back the power, because Trump's numbers are very bad. In the latest polls on certain issues, he has only 25% approval, 30%. We haven't seen such low figures in a very long time. So it could be very probable that the Democrats regain power.
But at the same time, there is this right-wing populist rise. I mean, in the Philippines, in Australia, in India, in Turkey, in Iran, even with Ahmadinejad. So it's a globe, and in many European countries. So it's he's extreme as a person, but he's a symptom of a political trend that we can see worldwide.
And one of the things that is going on is the collapse of Marxism. I mean, once upon a time, Marxism was a very major force in the world, and it's gone.
I'd like to hear what you say about the role of religion in the MAGA movement, because I'll just give you two extreme examples. First of all, we have a war minister now, Pete Hegseth, that belongs to an extreme Christian church. The church leader, Doug Wilson, I think he's called, he wants to take away women's right to vote. He wants to criminalize homosexuality. And how come that is accepted in a country like America, where, I mean, we've had gay rights movements and women's liberations movements that has been quite strong forces in America. And still we have this minister in the government who has these extreme views. That's one example. I saw a Tucker Carlson podcast the other day where he interviews a Catholic priest. Have you seen that? And this Catholic priest is not any Catholic priest. He is a full-time exorcist in the Catholic Church, and they are seriously discussing that some democratic politicians obviously are possessed by demons that has to be removed. I mean, to a Swede, this sounds just crazy, and this is in mainstream, well, alternate mainstream media in America. Well, it has quite an impact. How is this possible?
In America, they would just say, it's free speech. It's my liberty. Free speech, we can say what we want.
Yeah, of course, but I mean, it's still, I mean, these people are influential people. It's not just a fringe podcast. I mean, it's Tucker Carlson. It's not just a fringe church. It's the Minister of War.
My view is kind of like this. When it comes to religious diversity, a bit simplified now, of course, but it's not the case that we have a development, a history of religions that develops from one idea to another understanding, and everyone is there on the journey. Rather, the case is that all the ideas are there all the time, but what fluctuates is the status and how visible they are. So let's say belief in ghosts or in something like this. It will be in some periods it's a high status position, and then when it disappears, it might feel as if it disappeared, but it will be there, sort of hidden from the public.
Yeah, but it's the part
attention.
of the political action.
So exorcism is there. It's a part of religion. It's a major belief in Catholicism.
Yeah, but
and
now
in
it's politics.
Sweden may be an exception. Or at least Northwestern Europe may be an exception. I lived for 20 years in Egypt, which is a religious society. God is present. Possession and exorcism happen. All sorts of things which, from a Swedish perspective, are entirely ridiculous, are part of everybody's daily life, a part of people's mental furniture. Now, God is a lot more present in Egyptian life than in Swedish life.
Of course.
In the United States, it depends where you go. But there are parts of the United States where God is very, very present, and these things really
Yeah,
do
but my
happen.
point is, let me just say this. My point is that demons has been around in the evangelical churches for a long time in America, but I never heard before that you had to exorcise a politician.
No, exactly. And I think if you look at it sociologically, it's not that the pews are filled in the churches in the US either. It's not necessarily the case that people are becoming massively secular either, but what is new is precisely what you're saying, the political presence of Christian nationalism and also Catholic ideas about having a monarchy even. Where the monarch rules over people's souls as well. So freedom of religion is not a good idea then. I just want to say that there's also a potential religious divide here within this political movement, right? Because Hegseth is a massive Protestant, obviously anti-Catholic. Doug Wilson, his minister, is openly anti-Catholic. And then you have Vance, the Catholic convert. Bannon is Catholic. So there's the divide there, and there's a divide also on how they view Israel. So Tucker Carlson is very openly anti-Semitic and has called out some of these other guys like Mike Huckabee, who is the ambassador to Israel from the US, who is a sort of Christian Zionist who argues based on the Old Testament that Israel should be allowed to rule over greater masses.
Otherwise, Jesus cannot come back. So.
No, exactly. So the apocalypse is, I guess, what brings us back to traditionalism here, and also the destructor Trump.
But hasn't the United States, correct me if I'm wrong, since its beginning been deeply divided in many ways, but also in this deep divide between the sort of liberal America, the Constitution, the Founding Fathers, democracy, all these things that we like to think of as the idea of the US. That's one America. But then there is this other sort of white supremacist, nationalist, Protestant, Christian,
the original divide
other
was
America that's there. And now it's payback time for them, kind of feeling.
The original divide, of course, was the Civil War around l'esclavage.
Yeah.
Slavery, yeah.
Yeah. And but I think they were more united for a certain period, and the divisions have grown wider now.
And not only in America. I mean, polarization is one of the characteristics of the contemporary age, which some people explain in terms of algorithms and social media, which I'm sure has got something to do with it, though I suspect there's more to it than that.
If we're talking about polarization, I just want to say it's a myth that polarization is growing everywhere. So, for example, in Sweden, polarization is not as bad as in the United States, and it's not growing at the same rate. But there's a lot of talk about polarization, for sure.
How would you say that this relates to the Silicon Valley ideologies like Peter Thiel's anti-democratic tendencies and ideas? Does this correlate with traditionalism or in any way, or you're researching?
Well, I mean,
this is
he's
you.
talking
Yeah.
about. I don't know how it fits into this, but I can note that he's also, lecturing about the Antichrist, and is nowadays supposedly religious, although he is at the same time an avid believer in transhumanism and wanting to extend at least his own and some chosen people's lives, right? And that transhumanism is something that traditionalists, at least someone like Bannon, would be very much against. I'm assuming.
Dugin is explicitly.
Dugin
very
is
much
explicitly,
against it.
Against transhumanism.
Yeah.
And AI, I suppose, or no?
I'm not sure. I mean, I haven't seen much on that, but transhumanism.
You have to email him and ask him.
Is
Yes.
the final. Transhumanism is the final stage. I mean, we become subhuman, and we're making ourselves subhuman. But isn't there an apocalypticism in the Silicon Valley direction as well?
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely. And then there's the accelerationism.
Yes.
And there's also an esoteric aspect in that when people discuss whether we will all be erased from this earth by an evil AI sooner or later, it's not always clear whether they want that to happen or whether they think it's the horrible apocalypse it seems like for most people. So I think there's a play with symbols and a language for the initiated in that world too, but it's not as philosophical. That is quite difficult to I think, penetrate.
And all of this is, of course, profoundly anti-democratic.
Yes.
I mean, these are not Democrats in the small sense. Yeah.
No.
But I think this the technological development is a very sort of important explanation. I mean, even if polarization perhaps in Sweden is not as bad as we think, but I mean, in the technological development in the 15th century and the 16th century sort of led to this. We just couldn't handle the new technology that was around then, and it led to this massive conflict. So now we have this enormous technological leap, and we're not really ready to handle it. I heard that flat Earth believers, I mean, the rate of flat Earth believers and the smartphone, the use of smartphone correlates sort of exactly like this. The more smartphone, the more wow, you can jump down into any rabbit hole. And in this country, I mean, Sweden, we had the highest sort of level of people who traveled to fight for ISIS, Daesh, in Europe, among the highest levels. And the situation then was that we could have in one, house in Örebro or somewhere, they would be in the same building. There would be the people living in the different apartments would live in completely different universes. I mean, one apartment, there would be some kid living in a Daesh universe where it was a reasonable and good and morally correct thing to travel and fight for this apocalyptic sect. And then there would be a gay right feminist person in the next one and a liberal Democrat in the third apartment. And this situation, I mean, is related to this digital situation. It must be a very important explanation too.
I mean, it's certainly true that every new media form has had profound social and political consequences. So, we have a new media form. It's got to be having consequences.
But I think we also have the situation now that we have a few people who are so extremely rich and also think of themselves as quite philosophical. So they write books that aren't very good necessarily, but are quite visionary. For example, books about creating a new type of society called the network state, incidentally on Greenland. And these people are also the ones who made Vance Trump's running mate, and who some would argue partly lie behind Trump's second term. And incidentally, his first executive order was to also serve these Silicon Valley people by removing barriers to AI regulation. So I think when he gets into his head this idea of Greenland or for example, how ICE are operating on the streets, it's of course an idea that he gets being the person he is, but it's also the case that Palantir surveillance technologies owned by Peter Thiel in Silicon Valley, and the ideas of the network state being something you want to create on Greenland, I think have something to do with it. And it's important to keep one's eyes on those things as well, because those guys are going to be around when Trump is no longer around.
Absolutely.
They might even be around if they get to rule and decide, and if they get their dream come true forever, because they really want to go for eternal or at least longevity.
If I'm correct, Bannon worked for Cambridge Analytica, the firm that was behind Brexit and who was behind the first Trump election. So there's a connection here between Bannon and the tech companies that indeed can influence the result of elections.
It's almost that one becomes a bit conspirational.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it?
And then add to that this Epstein story. So we were laughing at the QAnon people speaking about
and they were a little right.
Pedophiliac circles under pizzerias, and then comes the Epstein files. And it's just a complete.
Good point. Good point. Okay, the time is running out actually. So we're gonna have some more music, but let me first ask you a final question, and then we actually stay seated here. But would you say that Trump and the danger he poses to the world order, because I think most of us agree on that, do you think he is a cause or a symptom of civilizational decline?
Who starts?
Do we have to choose? Well, a cause, if I have to choose.
Okay. Mark?
I think he's both. And I think that the one thing we haven't mentioned, so I'll just lay it on the table, is are the Chinese going to come along and solve all these problems for us?
Yeah.
If I had to choose, I'd say symptom.
Symptom of a civilization decline. Oh, okay, yeah.
And I would say both.
Both. Okay, stay seated. We will say a few words later, but I think we would love to hear Emil Lonidier. Please come up and give us some more music before we end. Where are you?
Thanks for a lovely conversation. I realized I had a song about this we were talking about now. I just haven't made up my mind yet. I will have to do in the last few seconds. So I will probably play 1.5 songs, because that's what Kista asked me about.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the panel, of course, and let us at least hope for the return of a rule-based world order, even if it's not sacred. Thank you so much for coming tonight in from the sun, and thank you so much. I think there are some flowers coming here. Thank you for tonight. Thank you. Gina, Mark, David, Alain.